And now I'm going to share the screen. Okay, Aiko, you might try it now.
Part one, HDMI one.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Okay, are you seeing Crimea?
Yep. American CAMS.
Yep.
With the typo.
Okay, so Crimea, ATACMS. We talked about that earlier, and there have been two more strikes. So I'll just do a quick because we've talked about it already. This is where Ukraine is putting our ATACMS system. This was new in the 1990s. But it's good enough to overwhelm the Russian defense systems. So here's where the targets this week, and maybe you saw about it, something about it. The Russian air defense system did intercept and attack them, and it exploded over a holiday resort. Really kind of sad. And you know, the Ukrainians are saying, "Hey, the Crimea is the home of fighter jets that regularly target our civilian infrastructure in Ukraine." And this is on the map. This is Sevastopol, this great natural harbor where the Soviets kept all their nuclear submarines during the Cold War. But the Russians were using it starting in 2014, but they've had to abandon it because it's within range of our ATACMS now. And so here's what happened on the beach. The Russians are claiming a number of people were killed. A tourist shot a video that shows the actual collision. And then the shrapnel was scattered all over this beach here. You'll remember either last week or a couple of weeks ago, we said that the tourist season was starting, and we were going to see if Russian tourists would dare to come to Crimea. And they have, because they've cut the rates. You can get really cheap vacation at these fabulous beach towns, which I think I shared with you. I visited in 1962. And holiday goers took beach loungers to stretchers, and the ATACMS are in Crimea are used as if Crimea was part of Ukraine. Washington has been very conservative about allowing Ukraine to shoot into Russia itself. But because Crimea is, for the purposes of this war, is considered part of Ukraine, the gloves are off for these ATACMS. And the second incident is Russian Space Control Center in Crimea was targeted. And huge fires have been recorded. Okay, hot off the press, we did international law, and we wound up with the International Criminal Court. And when we were talking about it before, they had come down in Gaza and indicted 5 people, 2 Israelis and 3 Hamas. But now, just this morning, they have indicted Shoigu, a guy we've been following ever since the beginning in 2022, because I was familiar with him being a Tuvan, which is where they have the famous throat singers, and my knowledge of Richard Feynman, who also had an interest in Tuvan throat singers, but he is the one token non-Russian in Putin's entourage. All the rest are Russians, many of them from St. Petersburg. Gerasimov, the Army Chief of Staff, was the other one indicted. And what were they indicted for? For targeting civilian infrastructure. What has been upsetting us for so long, these daily reports of bombing of especially the electrical grid. And this is classified as a crime against humanity, as determined by the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan. And he credited the Ukrainian prosecutors for helping him organize the indictment. It's just an indictment, right? They haven't been found guilty. But here is Karim Khan meeting with Zelensky. And these aren't the first indictments. You'll remember last year, the International Criminal Court indicted Putin for his targeting of infrastructure. And the woman who's in charge of the removal of Ukrainian children to Russia. She's the Commissioner for Children's Rights, and she was indicted. This is her escorting children from the Donbass on their way to within the Russian borders, which is seen as a war crime, an aspect of genocide. To remove children. All right. So I'll take a pause there and see if anybody wants to add any comments.
Well, most of the people who got hit in with the missiles, were they Russians or Ukrainian holiday people?
Oh, they're all Russians. Ukrainians don't go to Crimea. They'd be arrested. That's in Russia's eyes, that's a foreign country, and they would not be allowed and wouldn't want to be a holiday taker there. Yes, Michael.
Maybe I missed it from last week, but any comments about Putin going to both North Korea and Vietnam, and how that's going to play out in Ukraine?
Well, sure. I mean, Ukraine is going to be on the receiving end of North Korean munitions. I don't know about I don't think the Vietnamese are supplying Russia, and China officially is not supplying Russia, but we know that they are allowing in dual purpose items. So that's kind of bogus. But I don't think Vietnam is supplying Russia. I think maybe because of the history when Russia, Soviet Russia, supported them in the Vietnamese war. There's this legacy friendship, but I don't think that extends all the way to supplying munitions for the Ukraine invasion. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so last week we talked about Chinese oversupplying the world with solar panels and what a distorting effect that was having. But as if on cue, there's a big article about the solar revolution, and that it in part is being driven by this overproduction and so-called dumping. And that the next step, which will come within a year or two, is the mobilization of global demand to this way of thinking, to this argument. So I'm gonna go in pretty deep and because global warming and carbon pollution is such a huge factor in the weather we're seeing and the wildfires and everything. The fact that there is a real solution on the horizon really got my attention. And so I kind of did a deep dive. But as the price goes down, it's going to be easier to subsidize countries that really could use solar. And as you'll see, I'll end up today by talking about Africa, where it makes a lot of sense to have independent solar units, domestic, not attached to a grid, which Africa doesn't have. And so we'll talk about that. That's the destination. That's the punchline. So just to review, last week, the price has come down drastically. This little lump here, what's that? That's COVID. So that's gone now, and the drop in prices has resumed. And we talked a little bit about a lot of this is being driven by the unique state-owned enterprises that do receive a lot of subsidy to create this overcapacity that has Westerners concerned. So the solar coaster is another name for this phenomenon. And we showed last week, I'm just by way of review showing it again, the red is the proportion of solar modular production capacity provided by China. And the United States is this little blue strip here. The EU hasn't levied anti-dumping duties like we did in 2012, but they are about ready to institute duties on Chinese electric vehicles, which we've already done. Next slide, Ursula von der Leyen saying the world just can't absorb the dumping. Actually, this article that I'm about ready to dive into says it's not a huge problem. Overcapacity has been solved within a couple of years, given the current value of solar panels. Now, they say it's been a couple of years that it's taken in the past to have supply match rising demand. But they hedge a little bit. Let's see if it happens again. And they're saying that demand will arise to meet this Chinese surplus production. So now you have two thoughts in your brain at one time. Cognitive dissonance, because I'm telling you two things. One is a positive, that overproduction's a positive, but also when you consider price, it's a negative. So that's a micro problem, the falling prices. But let's consider the macro and hold both things in our mind at the same time, as F. Scott Fitzgerald recommended as something required to host a superior mind. But it's also used by George Orwell as doublethink, which isn't so positive way of looking at that phenomenon. So here's the essay. It's a long essay, and they're saying the exponential growth of solar power that we talked about so much last week will change the world. It's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's going to be huge, these sun machines. And we've already talked about excess supply. The solar age is going to result from the solar revolution. And if you look at it, it's 70 years ago that this really was started with the new technology provided by AT&T Bell Labs, who supplied us with a lot of the communications revolution, that basic research emphasis. And their initial motivation was, how do we get power to and telephones into places like Georgia? Well, 70 years later, now solar provides 6% of the world's electricity, and it's doubling every 3 years, and it's going to increase tenfold in the next 10 years. And by the end of the next 10 years, the solar fleet will equal 8 times the current nuclear power production. That's the power of this transformational technology. Solar will be the biggest source of electrical power by the mid-2030s. That's just 10 years away. And it's going to be half as expensive as it is now. And Africa, well, because of their unique situation, which I'll explain in just a second, is going to feel energy rich. So I offered this as a tease. I had David Pepper in mind because I knew he'd gobble this up. But what's been the source of our energy? So if you go back to the turn of the last century, 1900, a lot of biomass. What's that? Wood, plant excess but coal was coming in. And the British Industrial Revolution ran on coal. So now we jump ahead to 1960, which doesn't seem that long ago to some of us. We remember what we were doing in 1960. Some of us were in college. And well, you know, we had other renewables in California. That would be something like geysers. And then natural gas had been found, and oil was just really coming into its own with the Second World War. And you have that famous picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt meeting with King Saud, and that liaison has paid off as if payoff is the right concept. Oil grew and fueled a lot of our deepening industrialization. And then nuclear gradually came on board, this little strip here. And now we get to the turn of this century, and we see that oil's going to drop down below natural gas, and coal's going to continue as a transition to what? To solar, which you see gradually, that band gradually taking off. And the projection is it's a exponential growth. It's going to expand. And in another 25, 30 years, it's going to be doing all this. This is the fast transition scenario. And yeah, it's optimistic, but they make the point over and over again that all the fast transition optimistic scenarios that have been dreamt up over the last 40 years since we've been taking global warming seriously have been underestimates. That's been the error that's been made, is that wasn't optimistic enough. And who were the best predictors of the future? It was the environmentalists, and even they underestimated the power of solar in this fast transition scenario. So they specifically mentioned Greenpeace, for instance, which had been dismissed by experts as being just wild-eyed optimists, utopian even. And then you see wind is starting to come. Every time we go by the Altamont Pass, we're reminded that wind's on the horizon. And then there's this green hydrogen that have a lot of us scratching our head, but we'll try to make that understandable a little bit later. And as another bridging, natural gas will back up solar. We'll get into the limitations of solar is that it's generated in the daytime. But we'll talk about the strategies for getting around that. But certainly gas, which is much less polluting hydrocarbon than coal, is going to provide that for quite a while. So this is a pretty complex and busy graphic. But it allows me to refer to it and talk for 5 minutes, which I couldn't do in a very holistic way without it. So,
John, can I just chime in?
sure.
You know, the big thing is, are we pulling carbon out of the ground? So oil and gas and coal are all pulling out dead fossils. And the hydrogen can be, water can be split. So you can use things like solar or wind or things that are during the day, and hydrogen becomes a storage mechanism. That's the real big key there by, hydrogen gas.
Right. And we'll
Right.
talk more about that in detail a little
Okay.
bit.
All right. You're going to get there. Okay.
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
All right. So then they look at the history of other energy transitions that the human beings have gone through. And each one, as we went from wood to coal, coal became a diminishing availability as we exhausted the easy to reach coal mines. And then the same thing happened as we transitioned, at least partially, to oil. It's getting harder and harder to find oil. And then gas, less polluting, but gas is going to be available as a transition, but it's not going to be providing the majority of our energy needs. But the shortage problem is not true for solar. This is a completely different economic environment, and so and it's truly revolutionary. The plus it's lightweight. So just for comparison, the solar panels are based on a silicon, and you have to mine 7 million tons of it a year, which sounds like a lot until let's see, what can I do about that interference? Okay, it seems like a lot, 7 million tons, but for other sources of energy, you've got to get 8 billion, not million, 8 billion tons of coal. And for oil and gas, some 16 billion tons. So it's lightweight, easy to transport, and unlike the other energy transitions, there's no scarcity constraint. There's plenty of silicone-rich sand. There's plenty of sunny places, and there's plenty of human ingenuity. And I like this concept because this is it's the lack of imagination early on that kept us from realizing we were going into a real revolution. So here's Africa, and here's why I'm making it a special case. The whole continent has plenty of sunlight, more than really any other continent. Which means what? Which all an isolated house needs is a solar panel and either a battery or there's even now, as David points out, some cheaper ways of creating green hydrogen as a storage. Okay, Harold.
In some ways, you're preaching to the choir, John, but are you going to get to the negatives? Are you going to get to the problems, or this is going to be all pie in the sky? Because I'm looking at this, and yeah, solar is good, but when things go exponential, doubling whatever the time period is, at some point it doesn't double anymore. in very rare cases.
I think I'll get there, Harold. I think
And I can't understand why you're going on about Africa, because the population of Africa, while it's fairly large, it's not a big percentage compared to the whole world. So any solar that we're adding to Africa, we're adding to the total amount of energy that is being used. In other words, energy use is going up.
I
And
guess
the only bright side of that is at least the Africans aren't burning coal or natural gas to get their energy. But that's
yeah.
not
So,
solving the problem for the rest of the world. I'll stop and I'll let you go on.
yeah, so no, Africa illustrates that there should be an easy way for them to electrify without polluting, but it also allows me to talk about the local energy solution, which is just a solar. And we've seen this on the Navajo reservation. We drive by these isolated hogans, and there's a solar panel and a dish for communications outside every hogan. So I guess I've got a soft spot for a local solutions for poor people that are under.
Well, I mean, if everybody is living in a sunny spot and in relative isolation, then that works. But what about all the people in the big cities? Where's New York City getting its power from?
Okay, but I'm also using it to point out that all of Africa is sunny, which is not true of any other continent. So I think it's legitimate that I've used Africa to make 4 or 5 distinct points. But I'll tell you what, we'll talk about it at the end, because I think
Okay.
I'm going to spend an equal amount of time talking about the downside. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Um, so solar, everything's becoming cheaper. Chinese capacity. We talked about it as a negative last week, but it's a positive. The other positive is the Chinese can't rig the price of sunlight as OPEC tries to do. And there's this point that I'm trying to make, that sober forecasting has misled a number of people. But there's going to be possible constraints. And let's see if we'll start on this list for Harold. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of manufacturers that are going to go bust, like they are beginning to do in China when they run out of subsidy, because it's not solar is not the only thing the Chinese are subsidizing. They're subsidizing a lot of things, and municipal budgets are hurting, and they're under a lot of debt. So China could go bust. The problem of developing grids, sure, it'd be nice to do some individual hogans and isolated places in Africa. Yeah, but what about the cities? They need grids, and these grids haven't always been stable. I've already made that point. And they point out this is an energy revolution, and it's one of the least obtrusive revolutions that we've experienced. But they're making the case that it is a revolution nevertheless. Let's see. And the other thing they point out is the efficiency of solar, which is just the flip side of the inefficiency of fossil fuels. Only half of the energy available in fossil fuels ends up as useful. The other half ends up as wasted heat, and primarily that. The just a time out for me to get my head around what a gigawatt is. It's a billion watts. That's a gigawatt. I found this useful table that shows you a kilowatt and a megawatt, a gigawatt, and then we're hearing repeatedly about a terawatt, and no doubt pretty soon we'll be talking about a petawatt. So that just bear that in mind. So the time needed to install a new gigawatt, just to demonstrate the exponential growth. In 20 years ago, it took the world a whole year to install enough of a gigawatt of solar power capacity. In 2010, a month. In 2016, a week. Last year, a day. This year, 2 gigawatts a day. In other words, we could get in a day what it took 2 years to get 20 years ago. So I like wrapping my mind around it. And makes it feel real, what's going on. The other,
John, there's another advantage of solar. It pulls heat out of the environment, right? Everything else pushes heat into, but solar, you're actually taking the heat and turning it into electricity directly or into hydrogen. So it's got another benefit.
Yeah, a good point. And you're going to hear later on that we're putting solar farms on water, which prevents evaporation, and the solar panels being on top of water keeps it cool, and the panels work more efficiently. So there's a lot of hidden positive aspects of solar. Another way of bringing home the exponential stuff, the solar power is on track to generate as much as all the world's nuclear power plants in 2 years. And in 3 years, all the wind turbines. And by 2028, it'll generate more electricity than all the dams in the world. Gas.
John, I need to interrupt you here for a minute. You're talking about capacity and not production.
Okay.
Because production is based on when the sun's out. So you're talking basically about gigawatt capacity, not production.
I stand corrected. I appreciate having engineers in the group. And all the coal-fired ones by 2032. And I use in this example one that we experienced intimately. It's the Navajo Generating Station near Page, Arizona. And it came online when we were on the reservation in 1970. And solar is on track to generate more electricity than all the coal-fired plants. I'm going to focus on this one in just a second. But by 2070, solar will equal all the energy sources combined last year. So this is 1970 when we were there. This is 1920, 50 years later, when they blew it up. It was the West's largest power generating facility, Bechtel built, and it was what's described as the daring use of the Colorado River to remake 1/5 of the country. We've spent a lot of time talking about the problem of water in California. and certainly this is part of it. But 100 dams were built across the Colorado, a lot more evaporation, and we know not much of the river makes it to the Sea of Cortez anymore. So while we were on the reservation, it was reported that the plumes from this power plant could be seen from space. The coal was supplied by Peabody Coal, and my grandfather worked for Peabody Coal, my maternal grandfather, back in the 1930s. So I had that to contend with. They scraped it out of the earth on the reservation, created a slurry, and sent that slurry, and the plant gobbled 15 tons of coal each minute. It's hard for me to believe that. I didn't fact check it. I just said, what? And it drove the pumps that pumped trillions of gallons of water out of the Colorado for Phoenix and Tucson. In the Obama administration's Clean Power Initiative said, okay, Arizona, you've got to reduce your carbon output by 52%. That's when people looked at the calculations, the in and out and the pollution, and started discussing tearing it down, which they did in 2020. Subsidies. Subsidies were absolutely essential to get solar going, to jumpstart it. It happened really in two places. In Germany, the Green Party initiated some policies, but the bulk of jumpstarting it, the heavy lifting, was America by Obama. And you just had to jumpstart it long enough to demonstrate that prices would fall when you created certain efficiency of scale. And the positive feedback loop just took off on a global scale. Specifically, it was the Recovery Act in 2009, $90 billion. It was dismissed at the time by free market utopians that this was government picking winners. But in actuality, we were the only country that could jumpstart a whole industry and demonstrate a takeoff of building efficiency. They were looking for things at the time that were long-term. They underestimated the strength of solar, but it did make the cut, and Obama should get some credit because he certainly takes a lot of blame. So I mentioned Germany. They were interested in it because they like the decentralization, which one reason to like Africa and the Navajo reservation. At the time, though, it was associated with, well, that solar will help, but we've just got to reduce our consumption, which was kind of a pessimistic eat your spinach argument. And it took a while for even the Greens to realize that solar was much more than having to eat your spinach. Um, and so there were many estimates. 2008, they were looking ahead 12 years. They thought, well, the capital costs, they'll come down 19%. Now they came down 95%. The Paris climate meeting in 2015, they didn't understand the power, the exponential power of solar. They spent a lot of time talking about carbon capture and on burning biomass than on photovoltaics. So what about the two renewables, or solar versus wind, as we saw from the mega diagram? Solar's getting cheaper more quickly. It's more unobtrusive. Of course, riding through the Altamont Pass, we're all familiar with the number of golden eagles that have to be sacrificed. But solar is more two-dimensional. I like this way of capturing the difference. Two-dimensional, less visible, easy to stack, easy to ship. The downside is it covers a little bit more arable countryside growth of plants. But there certainly is more social license for solar, certainly more than for nuclear. And you may remember Angela Merkel, who was a nuclear scientist and Chancellor of Germany. After Fukushima, she just shut down the whole nuclear industry in Japan, in Germany, which seemed like she shot herself in the foot. But at this point, with solar coming on so fast, maybe not. A few graphs to show that how no one envisioned that. When this is the Obama Recovery Act of 2009, and at the time thought that this was going to be the growth path. I can't read my slide there. This is solar, right?
No, that's wind.
That's wind. Okay, so they projected that it would be flat, and in fact, it's taken off. And then solar down here at the time projected to be fairly flat, but taking off. And so predicting that something would take until 2030 when it actually took until 2011. And this is a more up-to-date. So this looks right currently up to the moment. This is from the Economist article. And so at each point, when people made predictions, they were always flatter than what actually happened, always flatter. No matter, so you just match up a point in time and see what was projected from that point, and reality always outraced the forecast. And the environmentalists were poo-pooed as zealots and illiterate when it came to economics, but they, in fact, were closest to this line, but even they underestimated. So maybe this article is too optimistic, and maybe the micro and the macro are closer than they believe. But in something like calculating the break-even price, they were off by a factor of 1,000. And this is truly revolutionary because they make the statement that this is the steepest drop in price of a basic cost of production the world economy has ever seen. However, and maybe this will get to some of the things that Harold wanted us to talk about. Solar is collected in daylight. So the grid comes into it, and then you have the problem of grid pricing, where a price has to change based on the time of day. As David has pointed out, there's a lot of storage issues that can help. And it's interesting that in sunny places like Spain and Portugal, the cost of electricity falls below zero. That the company will pay you to take the electricity off of their hands. And this negative price has been experienced by grids in Spain, Portugal, even Germany with the wind, but also right here in good old California. One of the things that is hard to do is use solar for heavy industry, and we all know for aviation and freight. So those are the things that still remain to be solved. The worldwide grid. So Iko and I were reminiscing about Buckminster Fuller. And he had this notion of wind farms in Mongolia that would be connected by networks, electric grids that would go across the North Pole. So that in the Northern Hemisphere, we'd have a day-night complementarity. Today, they're talking about international grids where England could be powered by panels in Morocco, and New England evenings served by Nevada afternoons. Here's a nice quote. "We have emerged from what Buckminster Fuller referred to as humanity's womb of permitted ignorance." And this is a possible grid slicing up the major parts of the inhabited part of the globe, and how that might work as Fuller projected. Here he is. He did a lot more on energy conservation, how to live efficiently. I don't know how many of you have been to that home in Berkeley that implements a lot of his principles. It's been 20 years since we've been there. It sported a Swedish toilet, which reduced your waste piles of dust at the end of a period of time. And so, as David pointed out, well, a grid can do it, but so can batteries and so can fuels created by electrolysis, which is what David was discussing early on. Here's his book. They were dreaming about this stuff and even shared it with the Soviets, who agreed that it was feasible and desirable. So there's a lot of investment in green hydrogen. India is interestingly leading the way. A lot of the petroleum companies are what's the name? Diversifying. And BP in Australia, Shell is looking at renewable hydrogen. And so Amazon's investing. So we got a lot going on. BP has been rebranded as Beyond Petroleum. I like that. So the history of growth with China, they started off by building the polysilicon foundries. China quickly took the lead and has kept it to the point where they're making 93% now of the polysilicon. And here's this. We've talked about it. They're subsidized. But what's worrying is a single hostile country is going to be in charge of an ever-increasing percent of energy. And we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're willing to pay India 20% more for solar panels just so we don't have to be dependent on the Chinese. But they're also targeting batteries. And the exponential curve is even steeper than it's been for solars. So battery storage has fallen 99% in the past 30 years. And here's the thing, batteries, just by existing, increase the demand for panels. So if we could make big leaps in batteries, we could mop up all of that excess supply from China pretty quick. And right here in California, we've seen that happen. More battery storage has become available in California. And that's led to a doubling of the solar capacity. And there's been some nights where batteries have been the largest source of power on the California grid. So that's happening. Another possible solution is, instead of laying transmission lines, you could create some huge battery trains where during the day you'd charge up a whole bunch of cheap batteries. They're heavy, but you wouldn't even have to take them off of the train. This might be a way out of the transmission lines, which we know are a source of wildfires. So there's that. And then the mass expansion in places like northern India, which gets a lot of sun. And on this one solar farm, you can get as large as what Germany produces. And India gets more sunshine, so these it'll be more efficient. And here's the thing: it was financed by the G8. So India, although they're a BRIC country, should be able to see the advantage of maybe cozying up to the G8 and our geopolitical concerns rather than Russia's. Who knows? There it is in full display. And then Harold was concerned about, well, what about the big cities? You can have floating solar farms close to big cities. I don't know, I can't remember where in China this is a reality, but obviously that cuts transmission costs. But the problem is that this is saltwater. Saltwater corrodes. So now in Portugal, you've got a floating solar farm on a dam, a reservoir behind a dam, and so it's fresh water. The pontoons are made from recycled plastic, and the idea is to use batteries if you have to, but being so close to the electro power station, it wouldn't take much to transfer the solar energy over into the existing grid that was built at the time the dam was built. So there are the own problems. Birds come and poop. But they've developed cleaning robots, a Roomba for the solar panels, one wag said. And I mentioned this earlier, the cooling effect of being on the water boosts the efficiency of the panels. And in return, they provide shade that stops the evaporation of the reservoir. So it's a real symbiosis. So I think I am going to have to finish this next week. I want to leave some time for discussion. How did I do, Harold?
Well, it still sounds a little pie in the sky to me. When things go exponential, John, you remember the old Indian story about the guy with the chessboard and the wizard and the king, and the wizard solved the problem for the king, and the king says, "You can have anything you want," and the wizard says, "Oh, I'm not a greedy person. You see my chessboard? On the first square, put one grain of rice, and on the second square, put two, and on
keep doubling.
8, keep doubling." And King says, "Oh, no problem. We can do that. That's not a big problem." Well, you know what happens when you get to anywhere close to square 64?
Yeah.
It's
the size of the earth.
It's more than grains of sand. It's more than stars in the universe. You can't go exponential for very long before it gets crazy. And in the 60s, they were saying that was going to happen to the population. The population of the world was exponential, and it was no way that humans could survive. And by this time, we would have had like 20 billion people on the planet. Well, we don't.
We don't. We don't.
We don't.
Women,
And,
women
and also back in the 60s, nuclear was the answer to everything. And we were gonna generate power so cheaply that we wouldn't even need to meter it, right? And that didn't happen.
that didn't.
So
But
pardon
solar
me, but
is
I'm just a little bit skeptical, shall we
so
say.
solar is taking off, and it's now cheaper than gas or coal. So
Yes.
it
But
does
it's
have
still being subsidized.
well, so's gasoline. It's called the military and the Middle East and the oils on the roads, and I mean we subsidize gas incredibly heavily. So
Right.
you know,
The other problem though is when you make something so cheap that everybody can afford it, guess what they do? They use more of it.
yeah,
And that's what's happening now. I mean, solar is making a contribution, but
yeah,
they're making a contribution to a bigger and bigger pie.
yeah. That's no question.
Michael's had his hand up.
Well, I just want to say one thing was when the Ukrainian war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, one of the first things they talked about, I didn't hear so much about more solar power as importing gas and oil, natural gas, and so on to Europe. And, countries that have a lot of oil still and coal, I suppose, like Russia. I mean, this is not to their advantage. And I could see them trying to follow up the work somehow. I mean, they have tremendous, I assume, reservoirs of fossil fuel. And the other thing is, I thought of in these European countries, it's not always sunny, it snows, it covers solar panels. I mean, a lot of things about solar panels, we think of it here because we have almost universal year-round sunshine, even in the winter months. But there are parts of the world where a solar panel would be covered with snow, and that wipes them out immediately. So, I mean, there are some other considerations. It sounds great about exponential and so on, but countries, and I think of like Germany, said they needed energy when Putin was going to cut off the supplies. And they didn't say we're going to go out there and build more and more solar panels. They said, get us liquefied natural gas and this, that, and the other. So
Well, you'll hear next week the Europe, which has added more renewable, twice as much renewable in the last year as we have. For Germany, it's wind more than solar. But Bruce has had his hand up.
Yeah, my comment is basically, I have two comments. One is I installed a solar system on my roof in 2010, and so it's now 14 years, and it's fine. It's great. I'm still getting benefits of it. However, the interesting thing is I was going to add some more panels, and the company SunPower and my roofer came up and said they gave me a estimate for what it would take. And as it comes out and amortizing it, and they had a beautiful graphs and all this kind of stuff of what you should do. And it was only going to be, it would cost to amortize it, it would be 25 years. And but with the subsidies, we could get it down to 18 or something like that. And I kind of look and say, well, you know what? I'm not probably going to be around to benefit from that. So I haven't done it. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is John, did you and I go to the Grab this at Mountain Shadow by any chance?
Well, we missed it. We were in San Diego.
Oh, okay. Well, that talks about basically what you need land for is perhaps maybe for water and food, and as well as how that will relate to solar panels. And so that the world is, there's not an easy fix. It's all interconnected. Anyway, that's my comments.
Can I have a comment?
Yes, Aiko.
I have to come over to you though, because if I put my
Well, while you're coming over, let Barbara on.
well,
Barbara.
I just want to tell you how happy I am
that you presented this, because I was part owner of a solar company in 1978.
Oh, wow.
It was thick hot water. We had to work 2 jobs to make it
Yeah.
work. Oil companies in our way every which way in those days. I have a lot of emotion over this. My dad built nuclear power plants. He was George Shultz. He was vice president of Bechtel, and so we had a lot of yeah. So, but he, I mean, nuclear power plants. There's nothing really, I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, we worked really, really, really hard in those days, and I knew all the solar people. We knew Sunlight and Power. They're still happening in Berkeley, but we sacrificed a whole lot
Yeah.
in those days.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to see the presentation. I totally believe it, and I always told people, it does amortize over, some people say, 15 years. And I just kind of go, do this for your grandkids,
Right.
Do this for kids and your grandkids.
And for the house that
You're not going to make.
I need a new car.
So,
Yeah, we were thinking about that for heat pumps,
I've
that's
got one of those. Yeah.
yeah. So maybe we should do it. Yeah, it's like the Native American philosophy, right? You don't do anything for yourself. You do it for 6 generations later. So yeah, Carol. Oh, I'm sorry. Aiko.
Go ahead, Carol.
So I just wanted to tag on to what Barb said, because I finally convinced my husband that we should get solar panels. Actually, I just have to say I bullied him into it, and I'm so happy I have solar panels on. And I went and I had SunPower do mine. I don't understand the whole thing with PG&E and how that all works out, but I feel like I'm doing this because I feel better about the energy that I use, and I think that it's going to be better for the next generation, and we've screwed up so much with them already. But I'm very interested in what Harold has to say about the negatives, because I can see where I'm going to, at some point, not in my lifetime, but they'll need to be replaced. So I think there's going to be an ongoing, maybe not as vigorous a need, but it's going to keep needing to be needed. And I hadn't thought about Germany and like how much battery storage could you get if you lived in Alaska, where you've got outrageous amounts of sunlight and then no light at all. So what happens there? I'm very interested in what Harold has to say about to make me see more than my little California, at the moment, overly warm home.
Well, that's why you need longer term storage. I mean, nobody's mentioned that the dam in Central California, which works as a reverse pump during the day and has 2 million acre feet. It's as you're going down the 5 there, it pumps water back up the hill and then turns around and lets it comes down. It's a novel approach. There are ways to store. I mean, you're talking about, can you store energy for 6 months? Which it does get tricky. There's no question. Hydrogen is one that can be stored for a long time, but it has to be stored under high pressure, and that makes it expensive to keep stored. There's no question. There's challenges, Harold. I would grant you that, but the challenges keep getting less and less with solar and wind than they were, and the challenges with nuclear get bigger and bigger. And the challenges.
Whoa. What do you mean the challenges with nuclear get bigger and bigger? Where are the challenges?
Well, Fukushima.
Well, that was an accident waiting to happen. It was a huge accident.
Well, there's lots of accidents waiting to happen, and one big one, and
in the 60 years of nuclear power, there's been 3 that I can think of.
Well, I don't want one near me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 500 square miles of Russia that are not inhabitable near Chernobyl.
There's a lot of animals living there for some reason, but
yeah, but it also, I mean, they're incredibly expensive, centralized. Yeah.
I can't argue with you. People have their emotional blockages, and a lot of people have a nuclear emotional blockage. But I mean,
I'll tell you,
technology is getting better.
Yeah.
It offers the chance to have a 24/7 base load, it can supply power when power is needed. You don't need to have all these fancy storage systems. It's a known quantity.
Yeah.
So I'll say,
Seems like we're jumping through a lot of hoops to do wind and solar, which have advantages in certain areas, and they can certainly contribute. But in my opinion, there's no way that they're going to take over the grid. It's just not going to happen. The grid is, they're too unstable to support a grid. And if you start doing all these fancy storage systems of batteries and hydrogen and da-di-da-di-da, it's going to cost way more than the nuclear or coal or combined cycle units that peak or pump storage that peaks. And if you take electricity and electrolyze water, turn it back into oxygen and hydrogen, that's not an efficient process. And then you got the hydrogen, and when you convert that back into electricity, that's not an efficient process either.
That's true.
okay, so I've got Aiko and then I've got Irene. Take it away, Aiko.
Just to mention some of the social changes that are occurring with solar is we've been taking a lot of Ubers recently, and we get picked up by Toyota Priuses and Teslas. Now, how does a Uber guy afford a Tesla?
My second ride in Uber was with a guy with a white Tesla with leather seats, taking me to the Oakland airport. I was blown away.
Me too.
3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, Irene.
I was just going to hop on the back of Barb's 1970s when my mom, who was a physicist, her company, TRW, sent her up to Alaska for storing energy from solar in aquifers so that it could be heat pumped back out in winter. I don't know where that went. It probably was a complete bust because I can imagine that it was too much heat in the ground. Permafrost would melt. But, you know, people have been working on this, you know, for a long time. And I think I've got two brothers that work in cogeneration. You know, there's just so much that's changing so fast. And I agree with Harold on a lot of the hesitations. But in the long run, we're going to run out of shit fast. And I have one question, which is that about 5 years ago, I heard a talk from one of the guys up at Lawrence Berkeley Labs about using iron instead of silicon for solar and for batteries. And I'm just curious whether anybody has heard anything about that since then, because iron is much more available, abundant in the earth.
There is an iron oxide battery concept, but I'm not that familiar with it.
But how far is it going? Yeah.
Say one thing.
Yeah, you can raise your hand.
Oh, can I say one thing? This is Rob. I saw a presentation recently by, what is it, Bill Gates of Microsoft. Anyway, talking about sodium cooled fission plants, smaller fission plants. He said that there's a big future. He's put $2 billion into it so far. Says it's a lot cheaper, a lot easier to build, and way safer. So they're building a prototype in Wyoming.
I just read that.
I haven't fact-checked it, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, no, I just read that. My brother has been advising him. My brother worked in nuclear too, so he's been an advisor a bit. And that'll be interesting, Harold. I don't know if you know anything about it, but supposedly they're smaller nuclear plants, but without the side effects of the old nuclear power plants. You know anything, Harold, about?
Well, I know
it's all about cooling.
Yeah,
they use the sodium as a coolant. It's inside the pipe. It's moving the heat from one place to another.
Yeah.
And wait for this. There's more than one Bechtel connection. Bechtel was involved up in Ridgeland years ago with what they call the fast flux reactor, and that was going to be sodium cooled. I'm not sure that ever got built though.
Well, then there's fission. I mean, fusion.
But before we leave the Bill Gates thing, I have to mention that
too far away.
The location in Wyoming where it is, it's in Kimmerer, Wyoming. And
Where?
back in the day, Bechtel built a mine-mouth coal-fired power plant in Kemmerer, Wyoming. So it's possibly at the same facility.
Yes.
And
Wow.
Harold, I was born in Richland, Washington. My dad was working on the atom bomb there.
Have you
Whoa.
ever been to the Leslie Groves Community Park?
Guy left when I was 7 years old, and then my brother went back there to clean up nuclear waste from what they had done, and then nothing happened, and they pulled the fund. Blah 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 blah. So,
Put a few
yeah.
downwinders.
So I can answer Irene on her mother's project. There is in Finland a town that has built a mega cistern, and it heats the water. And it's a slide that I have for next week, so I'll talk about it more then. And you can tell me if that was your mother's idea.
Oh, no, 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 no. She didn't go to Finland. She was just working in Alaska.
Okay.
Anyway, but thanks. That's cool. I'll look forward to that. Among other things.
Yeah. So interesting discussion. Any other points that are dying to be made?
Just that was very uplifting for me, who was in the trenches in the 70s. So that was.
When did you give up on that idea? Was it just too costly, or
No, there's still. You mean for what?
your business?
Oh, it's still it's still in business.
Oh, it is.
Sunlight and Power. Yeah,
Wow.
they're doing well.
Well,
Yeah.
hey, let me just throw in an interesting experience we had up in McLeod. So McLeod is, 8 miles off of Highway 5 in the foothills of Shasta, and it's an old lumber town. And there's a bed and breakfast up there that is a converted lumberjack dormitory, which we like because now it's owned by a Japanese woman who she attracts people from Japan because Mount Shasta looks like Mount Fuji. But get this, in this is a company town. It was a lumber town. And they took all the extra wood shavings, the biomass, and they used it to heat water. And they pumped the hot water throughout the town at that time into the radiators. And when we go there, we stay in a room that still has a radiator, and that was heated by biomass, which was very early on that diagram.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Okay.
I gotta go. Thank you all. Can't wait for next week.
All right.
Bye.
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 Thanks, John.
You bet. My pleasure. Stop taking.
That